Amazing. Hi, Jenny. Hi, Joan. Thank you so much for joining us. We just listened to your amazing show. First of all, how are you both? How are you, Joan?
Great. I'm great. I'm thrilled to be here. It's beautiful to see you, Jenny,
You too.
and to hear from you, Courtney, and to see others out there, Jen and Arthur. That's a great surprise. And you had a little glimpse of Anna, my tech assistant, and all things. So I'm thrilled to be back at the Tarragon.
We're honored to have you. And how are you doing, Jenny, on the road?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, this of course was the week we chose to be on vacation. So we're good. I'm up north, and I'm so darn excited to be sitting on a little panel on a screen next to Joan, because it's been 20 years since we premiered this show together and got to do these kind of talkbacks together all the time. And most of you probably know this, but Joan lives far away in Victoria and I live in Toronto, and it's on a rare occasion that we bump into each other in Victoria or here in Toronto. But I'm so pleased to be here with her and you guys.
Yeah.
I do invite those of you in the audience, feel free to put some questions in the chat if you have questions for these two folks. But I wanted to take you back to, well, both 1997 and 2001. And of course, the horrific murder of Rena Verk. It's funny, this show, I feel like, has always been sort of part of my life. I was a kid in 1997. I was 11 years old. And that event and the court case sort of was I feel like it was an ongoing background noise in a way to my childhood as a young girl. I remember discovering this show as a teenager and then touching on it in theater school as well. And so having the opportunity to work on it now has been a real privilege. I'm just wondering if you could tell us, Joan, a little bit about writing the play in 2001 and how that came about.
Sure. I mean, it bizarrely started as a commission from Green Thumb Theatre, a theater for children and youth in Vancouver. They got money to get me to write something about trying to get girls interested in science and math. And I did my best trying to come up with something, and it just wouldn't happen. And I, also when I was a young girl, I had zero interest in science and math. Um, and I was a mother then to a 1-year-old, and I also had been teaching part-time, working with lots of young students, teenagers, and then I thought I might try something about female friendship. And Patrick, the artistic director, said that would be okay, and so I started trying to do that. And as all writers know, what we intend to do and what we do are never the same. And throughout this time of me trying to make good on this commission, Rena Verk had been murdered. And I watched the news kind of obsessively about everything. And I realized about a year later, after, just writing a few monologues, trying to get into character, that I was going to write something inspired by the horrific event that happened in what felt like my backyard. And so that's where it started. I'm a slow writer, took 3 years, and and we had the great, fantastic good fortune to cast Jenny, who made the play everything that it is, and is responsible for so much of the success that it had. Because not only did she premiere it, she then toured it for a long time, and it went from one end of the country to the other, and far beyond. So she was amazing. I can't remember how old you were then, Jenny. You were 23?
Maybe 22 or 23, maybe, or maybe I don't remember. very early 20s, maybe 23.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was your second professional show. And
That's right.
yeah, what a big thing to give you. And we knew you were up to the challenge. We knew what a good actor you were, but we also had to find someone who had the maturity and to be able to tour, who would be okay after we had opened, and then she'd head off in a van across the country or whatever.
And I want to ask you, Jenny, if you remember your first encountering of the play, and I'm curious also if there was a bit of a workshop development process with the two of you and with Patrick. Do you remember much of those early days working on the script, Jenny?
I do. Yeah, I remember a great deal about the entire process because it was such a big deal for me, and it was terrifying, and because it was a one-woman show, not because of the subject matter, or it was just such a big feat. I can't even remember if I had seen a one-person show before, so I didn't even know how people did that kind of a thing. Like it was so maybe I had, but it was so anyway. So I remember a great deal of the show. And of the process moving into it. And what happened was Patrick called me, and he was great, actually. He coached me a lot going into the audition, because I think Patrick had seen my other show that I had done. Oh, it was at the Green Thumb, and saw that I played younger well, and he called me, and we had a huge discussion about her, and that was really helpful. And he really guided me well in the audition leading up to it, and how Joan saw the character, and then I auditioned for you, Joan, just by ourselves, just you and I, over top of the fireworks. The Fire Hall Theater in a little rehearsal hall, and I was terrified because I was meeting the great Joan MacLeod and auditioning for her all by myself. And then, but then that was it. Then Patrick offered me the part, and then we didn't see each other until we were at Playwrights in rehearsal. At which time, Joan, you stayed for the first week, I think. And so that was really helpful. It wasn't a workshop situation, but having the playwright there and available to ask questions for that whole first week of rehearsal was really, really helpful. Patrick was able to access her. And so although it wasn't a workshop, we did get lots of access to you, Joan. And then you came back near the end before we mounted it, I recall.
Yeah.
For a little bit.
And it was it's a great setup that they had at ATP then, in that there were days between previews because there were 3 other shows running at the same time. So I came back for preview and you actually have time to do some serious rewriting during preview. Things changed a lot. We cut a lot out of it. And again, we knew Jenny was up to the task, that I could throw changes at her the day of, and she would be excited by that. So
I remember even in our second year of touring, when we brought it to the Tarragon, you came to that opening because it was such a big special time for us to bring a one-woman show back to the Tarragon, and it was Urjo's last season that he had programmed. And I remember then you cutting out like half of a monologue, and we were in our second year of touring it, and it was really, really ingrained in my body. And you were like, it wasn't probably half a monologue, it was probably 2 lines or something, but being like really, having to unmemorize all those little things that you memorize in that. But it was so great to be working on something that was still alive, and you still looking at it and tweaking it. And you did that quite a bit, I think, a word here and there, right, Joan?
Yes. And I still always do that. And I just loved hearing the acoustic version. And I also wanted to do a few little nips and tucks to the script. Of course, 20 years later, I wanted to fix some stuff up, but I loved it.
Joan, I recognize so much the voice of Brady in the play as a person who was a teenager at that time, right? And yet you weren't a teenager at that time.
No.
And I myself now, I feel like as a person in my mid-30s, I have a hard time sort of sometimes finding the teenage voice or understanding the present day teenage voice. So how did you at that time find Brady's voice that age so clearly?
I've always loved writing teenagers. I love just how big the world is to them, how big the feelings are. Um, we were living on Bowen Island, then a little island just outside Vancouver, and I loved taking the ferry when the kids were coming home from high school, and I would eavesdrop in on them and listening to them goofing around and everything. And I have to say, Courtney, that for me, having this little toddler while I was writing this, and she started preschool just before we opened and everything, it really affected the writing of the script because her first day of preschool, the bossy girl told her who she could and couldn't play with, and of course all kinds of things came back to me about elementary school and high school and who's in and who's out and all that kind of stuff, and I really wanted to look at that, and it became really important to me that the group of girls and the one guy who are responsible for what happened uh, to Rena Burke, that they're not just the other kind of, it's all on a spectrum. And there's something that was very particularly female about this, and the way we kind of then anyway went underground, do things on the sly kind of, and the way bullying works with girls, just at that time anyway, it was much different, and so I really wanted to look at that. So I always think of Shape of a Girl too, just having this little girl and wanting to prepare her for the world and for the world to be a safe place for her. I don't know. That's yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Oh, I'm worried that we've lost Jenny. She'll hopefully she'll pop back in because I thought that's the perfect segue to Anamika's question about Jenny's experience revisiting this play now 20 years later. But maybe I'll pivot and ask you that, Joan, as your daughter grew up, how did you watch her experience through high school, and do you feel like we've gotten better at a society at addressing that kind of violence, that kind of bullying?
I think, Courtney, when we opened, um, these kind of stories weren't getting the headlines. Rena Burke changed all that in some ways, and then we started thinking that it was a coincidence that when we played Edmonton or Winnipeg or wherever we were, there would often be stories of what had happened in a high school recently there, that kind of thing, and that came to the fore very much, not because of the play, but at that time, people were finally starting to talk about it and everything. And I have to say too that I thought by the time we opened, I knew everything about bullying, and of course I don't. And when my daughter was actually a teenager, I had to get smart to how things worked again, because cell phones were starting to change things. So, it changed, but it's still there. And just how kids are taught now, they're given the language, they know how they're supposed to be behaving, and they also know how to again go kind of underground with us. So that even when my daughter was a teenager, and she and a group of her friends, they wrote a letter to a good friend of theirs because they thought she was doing dangerous things and all this kind of stuff. But in a way, it was almost a type of bullying. They were calling her out, and it was a group of them doing it to one girl, and it was disguised in supportive language. I don't know. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah,
No, it does make perfect sense. It evolves, doesn't it?
exactly, exactly.
Jennifer Bruin and Arthur, I think you had a question.
Hi.
Yes,
Hi,
hi,
Joan.
Arthur.
Hi, Jen.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi, nice to see
Um,
you.
As you know, Joan, I taught that play at the University of Calgary last year, and and I have to say, I think it was twice the kids, my students' favorite play. But one of the questions that came up more than once was, Brady was a smart kid and a kind of middle class or upper middle class kids, and the kids who committed this crime were tough kids, lower class kids, whatever. And one of them said they thought the play would be more relatable if Brady had been like that. They like relatable was a big word. But did you go through stuff about why did you choose to have that kind of class difference between Brady and Rena Burke?
Uh, I don't think that was conscious, Arthur. I think I drew on my own growing up and the teenagers around me, and I kind of wrote what I knew. Um, and I think you're right. I think that there is part of that, and it's in the play where Brady looks down on the girls that killed Rena Burke. So the class is part of it in a way, but we are all related. I wanted this to, be make as much sense to Brady as it did to those girls, kind of.
I always liked the journey of that Brady went through of what Joan was talking about, that she used that as a way to say, well, that's not me. She used the fact that they're from a different class, that, well, look at, they look like me, they like to act like me, but they're not me. Those kids have gone to foster care, they've gone to, and it's one of the reasons why that she makes these excuses for herself, that she doesn't need to say anything. She doesn't need to go to someone, an adult, and tell somebody what's been happening and what's going on, because she's not as bad as those kids. Those kids aren't her. And I always like that journey of her, because that's what we do. We find reasons in life to think to not be as bad as the person that did the bad thing. Well, it's not, different class, different country, different whatever. And then as it comes down to it, is she is just like them. She's just like the bystanders anyway. She may not be like the girl and the boy that finished her off and etc., but she's certainly like the bystanders that didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Jenny, we lost you for a second when we were talking about returning to this show now with older children. And I know this came up a little bit in our rehearsal too, when you were revisiting this show 20 years later, and now with your kids being, I think, almost teenagers, right?
No, 9. My oldest is 9.
Gotcha, right, of course.
Yeah.
And Mika was just asking about how the revisiting the piece has changed now, and how you might feel about that mother-daughter relationship that's in the text, especially revisiting the play now.
I was certainly, as Courtney can attest to, the vulnerability side of it was not hard to access, and I couldn't tell whether that was because I'm a mom now, or because her journey is so deeply ingrained from a long time ago, Brady's, or a combination of both. And I think it was a combination of being vulnerable to in your children and trying to do, and we don't always know, and the parent might not always be the person that guides them to it. And this, I think it's I even talking about it, it's the warmth that she gets from Anna, from the preschool teacher, and the preschool, and that's where she felt safe. That's where she feels the safest, and her memories with Adrian are safe, and her memories as being a kid are safe. And that's where my kids are at right now. They're in a safe place right now. Mm-hmm. And even Brady is past that, and she's kind of suddenly she's entered into a new part in her life where she has to make decisions that feel adult and feel hard and scary, and you want to protect your kid from that for as long as possible. And that she decides the only place she feels safe in this moment is to go backwards. And this, as the last lines of the play are, that she can only go back. The only place she feels safe and warm is when she was in preschool and everything was okay. And I understand that. I see, it's not long ago that my daughter was in preschool. And so, yeah, I still find that moment in the play so darn heart-wrenching, just heartbreaking, that and beautiful. And they're floating in the water afterwards with their faces up to the sky, like the blind kids. Like it's such good writing, Joan. Darn it.
Thanks, Jenny. You made me tear up when Brady goes back to the preschool and confesses to Annie. I get choked up thinking about it. It's, yeah, she's done some hard, serious work. And I was just thinking again of what you were asking about class, Arthur, and that. And I think something that has come up for me a bit the last few years in particular is that I've been asked about race in Shape of a Girl, and how that's not really a part of the Shape of a Girl. And is that a part of what happened to Rena Verk? And that's something I've thought about a lot more. And at the time, I just always said, well, I got my information about it just like Brady does. I watched the news and that sort of thing. And race was not coming up. That wasn't part of it. And now when I look back on that, were those girls, were they allowing themselves to do that partly because, they were already thinking of Rena Verk as the other, or not as human as they are, or whatever ridiculous reason they would come up with. And so I think that is something to consider, that Brady says, they did it because she was brown. And I wish I could have put a little bit more in it or something there. I think that's important. And Warren Klukowski, the guy who was also charged with her murder, he talked about race a little bit, and certainly watching him talk about that and use it in his defense, it almost felt like something that came to him later, because what happened was so horrific and how he got caught up and so out of control in this thing. So
I'm curious now. You toured the show for 3 years. You, as you mentioned at the top of this conversation, you had a lot of talkbacks like this one, especially with youth. And the wonderful thing about performing for youth is they are so, I think, honest in their responses to things. So I'm just curious if there are any moments from those conversations with those audiences that come back to you, reflecting on those talkbacks.
I have a great. It was actually at the Tarragon, and it wasn't in a talkback, but it was an experience with a youth audience, and these kids were. I could tell they were so not interested in being there when they got there. They were like, just not interested in their day at the theater or whatever. They were interested in like sitting next to the cute girls and that they rode in on the bus with from school. And as most of you know, unless you're tuning in from outside of the city, the Tarragon extra space is small and extremely intimate. And sometimes I did The Shape of a Girl in much like very big spaces. And this was like, they were a mere feet from me. And there was a group of guys sitting in the front row that kind of terrified me. Like I was like, oh God, this is gonna be so hard. Like they sat down, like they were leaned so far back, their legs spread so wide, like just like, I can't wait to go to sleep, essentially. Like I'm so uninterested and I can't, and I was kind of scared of them. And a lot of like, kind of at the beginning of the play, a lot of like, yeah, sort of snorts and like, and I remember at the end of the play, this group of guys, it was all guys sitting, and they were all leaned forward on their knees. And when, so what was it? When the line, I think, was Sophie, when Sophie looks up at me as if I'm going to hurt her again. And I say, I didn't do anything. And this one kid, excuse my language, kids, this one boy in the front was, yeah, no, you fucking didn't, like loud. And I was like, like he was in it and he was engaged and he was like mad at me for not saying anything. And he was like, you did the wrong thing. And at the end, after when I go to Annie and I talk to her, and they were they exploded into applause. It was so awesome. Like because I was so afraid when you're that close to the audience too, you feel like, oh God, they're going to know I'm not their age. I'm 23 or whatever. By that point, maybe I was 25 or, I went in with like, oh God, they're going to know I'm a fraud and I'm not a teenager and I'm trying to talk to them as if I'm a teenager and it's youth theater and they're not going to, and they were so in it and on my side by the end. And it was really cool. I will never forget that moment. And I was literally really scared of these guys. I was so scared of what they were going to do through the whole thing. And they were great.
That sent a shiver down my spine and made me tear up just a little bit. Jenny Young.
Can I add something?
Oh, yes, please.
Thank Joan and Jenny. I was one of those teachers who brought their classes to those sessions to those presentations at Tarragon. And the bus on the way home from the show, not a word. And we had used the story of Rena Virk in the classroom before the play was written, or I shouldn't say it, before the play was presented, because it was part of the Scarborough Board of Education had developed a manual around social issues, and the Rena Virk story was one of those. So the kids were very aware of the story, but then seeing it transformed in a new iteration was really eye-opening for them in a way that helped them understand the possibilities of drama. And then seeing you perform it in person, 12 feet away from them, was a stunning experience, and quite literally left them speechless all the way back to their Scarborough school.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you.
Well, the amazement came from you folks, so thank you very much.
And I'd just like to add, Joan and Jenny, thank you very much. So nice to see you. Took me back years, but how wonderful to see you, and how wonderful to have this play as part of the series. Beautiful, beautiful.
Wow. It's great that we all got together for this. Thank you, Courtney, for the beautiful production, and Deanna as well. And Jenny, I'm hugging you now.
You too, Joan. Thank you.